Begin with the big news. You may have already heard some of the hints. The Republican leader, Mitch McConnell, is now saying he will move forward with a plan to conduct the trial of Donald Trump, the impeachment trial, and they won't reach any initial agreement about witnesses. Democrats say the cover-up is unfolding in plain sight. Let me explain exactly what's going on before we bring in our experts. Mitch McConnell is now saying, look, he has the votes to begin this trial with the framework that he wants, meaning no effort at a unified bipartisan agreement like there was in the 90s. This would, if you believe McConnell, and he would appear to come through with votes when he has them in his caucus, it leaves him ready to come in and announce these ground rules that still leave open or kick down the road some of the biggest debates that are going on right now, especially after the news from John Bolton this week. So basically, you would have the start of the trial, the opening arguments, and later the Senate would then deal with and later have the clash over the big evidentiary issues, including these witnesses. Now, McConnell's making the point that this is basically, in its thrust, the same framework that was used during President Bill Clinton's Senate trial. Now, he's also ignoring a very big difference, and we can show it to you. Some of the major players, basically all of them, including the president, had dramatically testified already before even reaching the Senate trial. That includes, of course, President Clinton, who faced down Ken Starr by videotape and his investigators. Now, 3 of those witnesses were then brought back in the Senate trial in the Clinton case for re-interviews. Now, McConnell's comments come, of course, with that other news I mentioned that I'm sure you've heard about because it went off like a bomb or like a broken drug deal, to use his terminology. I'm talking about former Trump National Security Advisor John Bolton, who came out of the blue yesterday amidst everything else on Iran, on the Senate squabbling, on Speaker Pelosi holding back the articles, and said, hey, now he's suddenly decided he's actually willing to testify if the Senate asks him. Today, one of the few Republican senators to say that he does want to hear from Bolton still basically stayed in line with McConnell. Take a listen to Mitt Romney.
Are you still open to voting to convict the president?
I'm remaining impartial, as my oath will require. Assuming that impeachment articles actually reach the Senate, I intend to do impartial justice.
And do you think Mitch McConnell is acting in an impartial manner right now?
I think he will consider what he believes is the best for the country.
That's a dodge. The word impartial here can't be parsed out of existence. And it is literally the oath required before any Senate jurors hear this case. Now, Senator McConnell has stated in public that he's not impartial, which made a lot of waves. In fact, it's part of the reason that Speaker Pelosi is looking at this range of options. We're looking at her when she was coming in today, and they're meeting closed doors. What they decide, where they go in the House, and the pressure they want to put the Senate could be critical. I will tell you, because we always tell you whether there's news or not, that earlier today, Speaker Pelosi was staying mum. Also today, we're seeing some new reporting about how Donald Trump's team will approach this looming trial, lawyers and their strategy. They are looking also at Clinton's game plan. White House counsel Pat Cipollone will take a lead role as a government lawyer. Reports are that Jay Sekulow, Trump's longest-serving personal attorney, could participate in some way. We've discussed some of this when we've had him on the beat. Here's what he said.
I don't see where it's a high crime or misdemeanor. Tell me what rule, law, or statute's been violated by the president as commander-in-chief and as the chief executive under Article 2 of the United States Constitution violated any rule. You may not like the politics of it. You may not like the statement. But where does it violate a law?
Joining me now to kick off our coverage, Shauna Thomas, former D.C. Bureau Chief at Vice News, now back with the NBC News family, and Maya Wiley, former counsel to the mayor of New York City and a former civil prosecutor in the Southern District of New York. And we'll have some Hill reporting as well tonight. Nice to see both of you.
Good to see you, too.
Maya, let me start with where Mitch McConnell has a point. He does have a point that in the Clinton trial, they started with opening arguments and kicked the can down the road to debate the witnesses later. Where a lot of people say he doesn't have a point is he's not pretending or even claiming to be impartial about bringing in witnesses later. This looks like a prelude to trying to block them.
Right. I mean, the real question is, do we fear daylight or do we fear darkness? Because really what Mitch McConnell is saying is, I fear the daylight. Because the difference with Clinton, as you said earlier, is they had all the documents. They had heard from all the witnesses. They knew all the facts. You could decide after we have a second round, and after we've heard questions from the senators, we'll decide whether or not there's anything more we need to hear. That makes sense, at least in a context in which you know all of the facts. In this case, they're literally saying we don't know all the facts. In fact, every time new information comes out because someone else outside of Congress was able to get some documents and make them available to the public, we learn something we didn't know before. That's why it's so important to have these witnesses. That's why it's important to have the documents if it's going to be a trial in daylight versus a non-existent trial.
But I want to turn to Shauna and get your thoughts on all the above.
Well, I do think there's a little bit of a timeline in that you have, I think it's 5 senators who are still running for president of the United States for the Democratic nomination. I think there was some reporting today that Senator Bernie Sanders was talking about the plane that would take him back and forth. But at a certain point, their campaigns look at Nancy Pelosi and say, hey, we have the Iowa caucuses, which are followed the next week by New Hampshire, which are followed like 2 weeks later by Nevada and then South Carolina. There's only so much we can do. And they know they have to be in that Senate chamber when this is going on. They cannot run for president and not be part of this process with the president of the United States. So you have some very practical political concerns that she needs to take advantage of. I also think Casey made this point about Nancy Pelosi's leverage, Speaker Pelosi's leverage, and that she kept this conversation in the news over the Christmas holidays, kind of until we got this Iran situation. She got people to question the process that Mitch McConnell was going through. We did learn new information. But here's the deal. She is running out of leverage. What else can she do and if she doesn't send them over, then will they claim that she is not doing a fair process in the Senate? She is not giving the president of the United States the chance to argue his case. So at a certain point, you kind of got to get on with it.
Yeah, I think substantively, and there's always more than just substance in Washington, but substantively, if this is urgent, which they've said on the record, and if this is going to be a trial, which it is, then at a certain point, all deliberate speed, speedy trial, all the other terms you can use, even if you don't think the president always affords them to everyone else, is still the standard. I don't think holding them for a couple of weeks just to talk about the format violates that. But sooner or later you get there and you have the Senate Republicans, Maya, pressing, saying, well, maybe we'll dismiss the whole thing if we don't ever get it. I do want to play for you from the throwback machine.
There's always something in the throwback machine.
Lindsey Graham, back when he said what Speaker Pelosi is saying today, that if it's a trial, you need witnesses. Take a look.
In every trial that there has ever been in the Senate regarding impeachment, witnesses were called. The big problem I have, if we don't get to call meaningful witnesses, direct witnesses to the point, is that you're basically changing impeachment. Impeachment in the House is not the trial. When you have a witness who was there, who was engaged in it, who was in the middle of it, telling you about what they were doing and why, it's a totally different case.
You know, so there you have it. There's a lot of hypocrisy right now in this conversation about what precedent is or isn't. You know, what I would say is the House absolutely can. There's one game changer that we didn't talk about, which I know you covered last night, Ari, which is John Bolton saying he will now testify. Should be some leverage. Now, it may not be leverage in the sense of the timeline, but let me tell you what I think is the principle that should connect all these pieces, which the American public deserves to know. The American public needs to hear from those people who were in the room when the conversations were happening and understanding what decisions were made. That means that what the House should absolutely do is subpoena John Bolton, because what that will do is ensure that the American people are still hopefully getting facts and not fiction.
Well, that goes back to what you were saying, that if you really think that that what President Trump did is a matter of national security, is a matter of an impeachable offense, then the House of Representatives, whatever the Senate decides to do, should then try to get as many facts out and hear from John Bolton if he's willing to actually talk to the House.
Yeah, Judge Napolitano on Fox News was discussing the same point, the value of someone like this who's such a key witness, echoing you, but saying it to an audience that may hear that less often. Take a look.
He could say, I was there when the president said, fill in the blank. I'm not giving this guy his money until he goes after Joe Biden. I mean, if something like that comes out of his mouth, that would be very harmful to the president. And it might it might force the president to take the stand in his own defense.
Shauna, is that Judge Napolitano fan fiction to episode of 24 coming to you near you, or
the president of the United States taking the stand in his own defense in this particular situation? I think that's a little bit of legal fan fiction, but I mean, the thing is, we know John Bolton knows something, right? He is totally telegraphed it. He said he's willing to talk. So I think the thing to take away from that is that Judge Napolitano, you are saying, hey, let's hear from John Bolton. I have to think, and tell me if I'm wrong, that all of the lawyers that President Trump has around him would tell him, do not take the stand, because also that lends credibility to this process, that they want to argue in a political context that it has no credibility.
Well, and he didn't take the stand with Mueller.
Well, and look, he doesn't want it. No lawyer wants him to take the stand because the man does not make consistent statements.
He did answer questions for Mueller, though we found that some of that is inconsistent.
Well, as you know, interrogatories aren't really by the client.
And saying he didn't remember things, it's a little hard to believe he didn't remember. Maybe he didn't. But if you actually had him as a witness, you could actually go harder on, you say you don't, well, let me give you a document that refreshes your recollection. Let me remind you of something you said publicly, because now it sounds like you're saying something different. Well, that's why you don't want him on the stand.
Or Giuliani says you did send him to Ukraine. So if you say you didn't, who's lying? Right. One of you, and that kind of pressure. I want to talk to you a little bit about the Senate side. Speaker Pelosi has played this even past the point when she would seem on paper to have a role, which is interesting and shows you again some of the way that she has proven to be such a strategic communicator in this era, in this very different era since 2016, obviously. Chuck Schumer sometimes, and you're a student of Washington, of these stories. I'm very curious what you think, not on the law, but on the communication and the politics. How is Chuck Schumer doing? Take a look at him responding today to McConnell, coming out with this partisan plan on the rules. Take a look.
Who ever heard of a trial without witnesses and documents? It's unprecedented. We say witnesses and documents, fair trial. No witnesses and no documents, cover up. That simple sentence describes it all.
I mean, I got to say, this is sort of typical Washington, D.C. in some ways, even though we're talking about an atypical thing because it is impeachment. But in the House side, you know what? Nancy Pelosi has the power because she's the Speaker of the House and the Democrats are in control. On the Senate side, even though you have 60 votes and a couple of other things, though the impeachment rules are a little different, Mitch McConnell is in control. And what you are seeing there is Chuck Schumer trying to spin the story for the Democrats in that particular case and saying, hey, if Mitch McConnell doesn't work with me to maybe call witnesses, to be willing to have more documents, he is saying that the process in the Senate was illegitimate. We had a bunch of Republican senators saying the process in the House was illegitimate. We had a bunch of Republican House members saying this process is illegitimate. This, to me, sounds like very typical Washington, D.C., I got to admit.
And lightning round, given McConnell's statement today, how soon does this trial start?
Oh, good. No, I don't know. I mean, I think it starts soon, to be honest.
Shauna, we've worked together before.
We have.
If you don't know, I need you to just make it up.
Okay. I mean, that's what television is for. No, I mean, I think it's very clear based on what Casey was saying and Nancy Pelosi huddling with people that there's only so much longer they can hold this. So starts soon-ish.
A couple of weeks, because you said I had to make something up, so I just did. I made that up. But I want
You're following the rules.
I always follow the rules when Ari sets them. But I will say one thing. This is not spin to call this a cover-up. There's an article of impeachment on obstruction, and we have never seen a sitting president deny Congress what this president has denied him. I think cover-up is not actually a spin word, although I agree that there is a tradition within Washington. It's something that's actually happening right now.
Really interesting to get both of your wisdom, especially given your knowledge of these issues, legal, Washington, politics. Shauna and Maya, thank you so much. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.